Hi, I'm April from aprilstorm's props. Today I'm just going to show you some quick techniques that I use for finishing gauntlets. I get a lot of questions. People have asked me to make a video, so here it is, my first attempt at an instructional video. Now, depending on how you actually make your gauntlets and what material you use, these are 3D printed, I'm not sure if these are Bo-Katan or Deathwatch, but it's really much of a muchness. The material is actually really important. Whether you use PLA, PLA+, PETG, ABS, ABS+, or whatever else you happen to decide to use, the finishing techniques are probably going to vary a little bit. For example, with ABS, which is a favourite of mine, particularly for gauntlets, as it's semi-flexible, it's fairly strong, and you know, it's a very familiar plastic for most people because Lego's made out of ABS. It's actually quite easy to work with, so it's quite easy to glue, and you can use things like modelling glue and that kind of stuff. Now, one of the things I do is, if you probably have a close look at this particular gauntlet, you can see it's a little bit like it's got like a wash on it. What I've done with this is I've given it a acetone wash. That is, I've literally poured acetone over it very quickly with a brush and just brushed it off and made sure that there's no pools or pockets of acetone on it. And what that does is sort of smoothens any of the hard edges. Sometimes in a printer there'll be, you know, some burrs, sometimes some lines and so on. Now, the best thing to do if you want less work for finishing is print your gauntlets in a high resolution. I print by default in about 0.2. Anything less than that tends to take too long, and I find it doesn't really add that much to the quality. So about 0.2, 0.25, I wouldn't go any higher than that. It becomes a lot of work. Unless you've got something really big like a helmet, and you can argue that you can go bigger on certain parts. But you'll have more lines to work with and try and get rid of. So what you could do to start with is acetone wash, but that only works with ABS. It doesn't really work with any of the other materials. Now, what I find works probably the best, particularly with ABS, and it works with PETG quite well as well, is just sanding it. And how much you have to sand really depends on what other things you do to complement the finishing technique. You can take the gauntlet and you can just sand it and take the edge off the sand with fairly rough grit. Now, I use the heaviest grit I can get onto my sanders, and there's actually 3 types of sanders that I use, and I'll sort of show you briefly. By far the most versatile is this thing. It's I'm not sure if it's a sander or what it is. Multi-tool is what it is, but they come with a little kind of triangular Velcro thing. This is a Ryobi one. There's various brands, but it has a Velcro kind of thing on there. Now, it's designed for fairly lightweight use, so the sandpaper it gets is that you get whether it's not a very heavy grit. But what you can do is you can go and buy pads that from other sandpaper machines, or the big square sheets, and just cut them down. They have the Velcro backing, and they'll go quite nicely on there. The thing with this is you want to be able to take off as much material as possible, so that it's less work. Now, you finish with other things. You put finer grit when you're done, but just to keep the things off, most of the print lines away, heavy grit's really good. Now, you could probably finish the whole thing in this, but the reality is I use 3 tools to do that. I have a bench sander over there, which I won't show you, but I only really do that if I'm trying to join stuff. If I've got a lot of work, I use a mouth sander, but I've changed it to the square pads, because I really only do this for large surfaces. Again, a very heavy grit, one of the heaviest ones I think it's an 80. And this is another really cool tool. It's called a power file. It's a horrible name, but it's basically, I don't think it's plugged in. It's basically a mini belt sander. So, okay, well, I don't know where it's plugged in. I've got to work it out. But it's a mini belt sander. Now, this takes a lot of material off very, very quickly. So you've got to be quite careful how you use this. But this is really good if you're where you've got like just things that you want to just cut off, particularly if you've gone and done some welding. That is, that you've used something like a doodle pen or or even a plastic welder, and you've got a lot of surface that you want to remove, I find this is really excellent. It's also good for other, types of things apart from 3D printed props. Really good for cutting visors out and smoothing the edges. Now, by far the most preferred technique that I use, probably the quickest, and I think this is probably the best, is to use a combination of spray putty and sanding. That is, any really rough edges, sand it first, take them off, like any burrs. Maybe use a file to get rid of any rough edges, and sometimes you get globs that build up around the print. So, have I got any examples? But, basically go through and clean up all the, really rough pieces that you have maybe from supports and so on first. Once you've done that, spray it with the spray putty. What you'll end up with is something like this here. So it's basically a really thick paint, but the thing with this paint is it's really easy to sand. You can hand sand this. If you just got the one, I would hand sand it. But what it does is the paint actually goes into the gaps. Now I've just sanded this down a bit, and you can see there was this was not a particularly fine print when it came out, so you can see that the paint's actually gone into those grooves. What this does means that you basically are sanding away not just the plastic but the actual putty itself. Now, if you're using PLA, it's probably the only way you can do that, because PLA doesn't sand particularly well and tends to melt as you sand it. So PLA Plus might be a bit different, but definitely PLA tends to clump up and clog up the sandpaper. So what you would do is basically coat it in a ton of this stuff, maybe multiple coats, and then sand it back. It actually works quite well. The only thing is it's a horrible colour. So I've got these, gauntlets that are printed in grey to try and make it look metal-like, and then we've got this green kind of stuff. So a bit of a trick that I do is I only really use the spray putty filler to fill the gaps, and then I actually coat it with another type of paint, which I'll get to. But I'll just show you the techniques that I use just for doing this sanding. So I'm going to use the multi-tool to do that, and I have it on a slower sort of setting. Its maximum speed is, I think it's a 6. I normally have it at about 4. You don't want it to go too fast. You don't want it to melt the plastic. You don't want to push too hard on it. And I find it works best if you're actually sanding a putty sprayed gauntlet rather than just raw plastic. But we'll do both. So there it goes. And I literally let's zoom in on this, I think. Fairly heavy on the gauntlet. Show it no mercy. It should be able to take it. And the fact is, if it doesn't survive this, it's not going to survive on your hand. When you're sanding, you'll find that you'll be taking off enough of the spray putty, which is a lighter colour, and then you've got this sort of darker colour. It means that you've touched the edges. If you can still see lighter colours there, it means you haven't completely filled or sanded back, so you want to be able to sand that right down to that level. and you can do the whole thing. There are going to be spots that you can't get to with a machine, which you can use a bit of sandpaper and you can do it yourself. The reality is that that's always going to be almost impossible to get everything out of a 3D print. There's always going to be corners and nooks and things. And I find, the spray putty actually works really well to fill those. But, it's not 100% perfect. It's very, very close. So I've sanded this down to a level which I think will actually hide the print lines, all the visible print lines. Now this is required for the Mandalorian mercs for approval. You cannot have visible print lines on your gauntlets. So you do need to sand them back. I find this is probably the easiest technique. So you can see now I've actually removed a lot of the spray putty. And now I can actually just go and use normal painting techniques to actually finish the rest off. So now I'm just outside. I'm just going to do probably the final, what I call the primer, but it's not really a primer. I use this forged hammer paint primer in 1. It's a Rust-Oleum product. It basically gives you this kind of weird like pattern when it dries. But what I find with this paint is, again, this one tends to it's quite thick, so it tends to go and fill in a lot of the gaps in the prints and on print lines. So it hides and obscures most of the print lines, and has the added bonus of looking metal-like. So when you scratch your gauntlets, you're scratching a layer away, and you end up with a metal-like finish, which kind of works with the whole theme of what the gauntlets should look like. Again, you just spray quite thick, and it will actually go into the grooves, and it'll start to kind of form that pattern. Now, as far as the products are concerned, most things, you can get this from a hardware store. In Australia, you get it from a place called Bunnings, but I guess Home Depot in the US, or whatever it is that you have over there. With the spray putty is available at most auto body shop type places, because it's used to fill, and hide defects in paint jobs and body filling work as a kind of a finishing job. And that's where you buy those from. In Australia, you buy it from Repco. It's quite easily obtainable through Repco, or online. I mean, just do a Google, even eBay. They seem to sell it on eBay, although it's actually cheaper if you just go into the Repco stores. It's about $18 a can, and one big can will probably do 2 or 3 sets of gauntlets, so there's actually quite a lot in it. This stuff's really useful. I find I do more than one coat. The trick is, you probably need more than one coat to completely obscure your print lines. When you're done, I guess the only problem with this paint though is it does take a while to dry, so it is a 24-hour drying, whereas a spray filler you could probably sand after about 2 or 3 hours if it's good weather. Nice weather today, even though it is winter in Australia. So it's good conditions to actually do some painting. So, well, I hope you found this useful, and I will probably publish some, if this was any good, I'll probably publish some more how-to guides in the near future. Thanks for watching.